Great pleasure. Even though she's far away, long distance, it's still the great Miranda Devine, ace New York Post columnist, Fox News contributor, and host of the brand new podcast, Pod Force One, which launches tomorrow. Her first guest is none other than President Trump. We will talk about that perhaps in a few moments. Miranda, welcome. I mean, how could the Democrats have played their cards so badly? How could they have misjudged Donald Trump so badly? How could they not have seen the determination of this administration, you know, putting Pam Bondi out, putting Kristi Noem out and others? I mean, they're whining and talking about lawsuits. Meanwhile, the people of Los Angeles are worried about safety and criminality and breaking their businesses and looting and all the rest of it. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. What you think about this as you're watching it unfold?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Look, in D.C., it seems a long way from the riots. It's a very calm and collected here. But honestly, I think that the Democrats believe, since they have nothing else, they don't have a good leader, they don't have any policies that the public wants, that they've decided that they're going to try the same playbook that they did in 2020. It worked for them then. They won the election, you know, partly as a result of all the chaos that they stirred up with the riots of the Summer of Love. And so I think, you know, they're fulfilling Einstein's theory of insanity. They're doing the same thing over and over and thinking that they're going to get the same result. They're not going to get the same result. They're the reason that Donald Trump won in 2024. He admits, he says himself, a big part of that was the border. That was probably the main part. And, you know, you look at polls and 75% of Americans plus are totally behind the administration deporting illegal alien criminals, and a majority is still behind just deporting all of Biden's illegal aliens. And, you know, Donald Trump has called it an invasion from the beginning. And when you saw those foreign flags in the riots in LA, that was proving his point. He has the moral high ground. And I think Gavin Newsome is desperate, and that's why he's begging Donald Trump and Tom Homan, please, he says, arrest me. He wants to become an anti-Trump martyr. But I really think that the country's moved on.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I just think it's a 75-25 issue, as you suggest. And it's amazing to me. So we're, we're about 7-8 months after the November 5th election. All right, which was pretty much of a landslide, especially the swing states. And still, Democrats have not wised up on some of these key issues. They just have not wised up. And one of them is this issue. The border, security, yes, but also the deportation of these criminals. Yes, everybody knows this. Now, here's Newsome whining about federal troops, National Guard, and Marines. Now, I'd ask anyone objectively, watching this thing basically fizzle out last night after these strong statements from AG Bondi, for example, and Kristi Noem, and listening to what Mr. Trump was saying, and sending in the Marines, and sending in the National Guard. Do you think people are glad or not glad that Trump put in these additional troops, particularly after the L.A. police chief said we need some additional help? And here's Newsome whining about the troops, whereas other people are saying, thank heavens we stopped this thing in 72 hours before it broke out. I mean, really, it's just common sense, Miranda.
It is common sense, and I think that the only people who are unhappy about the troops coming in are Gavin Newsome and Karen Bass and these other radical Marxist Democrats, and they have no idea and they don't care what the public says. I think they've given up the idea of even, you know, trying for votes because it's such a blue state, California. They just don't care. They just fight among each other to go as far left as they can. They have no, or have had up till now, no Republican opposition to speak of. I think, you know, with Trump that may change. But, you know, they've chosen to die in this ditch where it's gangbangers and murderers and child rapists that they are defending, and it's the American people who are their victims. And I just cannot see how anybody in California is not welcoming the troops. And, you know, Newsom is using the fact that this strong move by President Trump and his administration, sending in the troops, having the Marines on standby, you know, that is why the riots haven't spread and become like the Summer of Love. And yet Newsom is using that as, oh, well, the riots weren't that bad. And the media is doing the same thing. You've got Rachel Maddow, you've got CNN, MSNBC. They call them rallies, and they say, oh, you know, if you're in LA, nobody even notices it when cars are on fire.
Well, people know. Look, people see in their own eyes. And I'm going to say it's not a coincidence, okay, that this thing fizzled out last night. Everybody thought it was going to be worse. There should have been a curfew, but it wasn't. Everybody thought it was going to be worse. Funnily enough, oddly enough, coincidentally enough, say what you want, it kind of fizzled out because most of them don't want to go to jail. And that's what the message from Trump was so absolutely clear. And, you know, Miranda, before I get to your podcast and stuff, one other thing, it's a point that I made last evening, and I want to emphasize it again. This was, to some extent, a global event. What do I mean by that? First of all, California thinks it's its own country. It's not. California has to be subject to the laws of the United States of America. And Donald Trump is making that very clear, okay? This is almost a Lincoln-esque thing. Do not. There is no secession by California. Second point, related to that, Xi Jinping is watching, Vladimir Putin is watching, the mullahs in Iran are watching. This is about a president, a new sheriff in town, who will not tolerate insane insurrectionist type of uprisings, okay? Law and order, public safety. It's a little bit harkens back. It's a different time to the Ronald Reagan firing of the Patco strikers 40 years ago to send a signal to the Soviet communists. The whole world was watching Trump handle this with toughness. You know, Miranda, real toughness, no flinching. And so was his whole administration behind him. And I think that global take is very, very important. You see, so, I mean, you're an Aussie. You know how this thing works. Is everybody watches TV. Everybody's watching L.A. And Trump made an important statement, it seems to me.
He really did. And look, he himself says that compared to his first administration, he just feels much more emboldened, much more confident. He knows that he's got cabinet members. He hasn't got turncoats like Milley and Esper, who really acted against him in 2020. Everybody is rock solid behind him. You know, he could not have a more united cabinet, and he's showing his strength. He knows exactly what he needs to do, and he does it decisively. And as you say, that's a great advertisement to the rest of the world, that is how he will treat any infraction by the Chinese, by the Russians, by anybody else in the world. He is going to be tough by the Iranians as well.
You bet.
And, you know, at the same time, he's got all those balls in the air he's trying to juggle.
A lot of people are going to want to make deals with him. I'm saying that's one of the offshoots of this, and it's all good. Miranda, tell us, give me a little hint. Give us a little bit of a hint. You had your first podcast, a nice way to break into showbiz with the President of the United States. What did he tell you, Miranda Devine?
It's true, isn't it? I mean, honestly, you cannot have a bad interview with the #1 entertainer, Donald Trump. And he's just so generous with his time. We had 45 minutes with him and in a beautiful library in the White House. And we talked about everything from, you know, Elon Musk, LA riots, Gavin Newsome, and including some of his childhood. And a little tidbit I'll leave you with that I bet you didn't even know, Larry. Donald Trump was tested, aptitude tested when he was a child because his parents thought he was a little bit rambunctious and wanted to see what he was good at. And turned out he's a musical genius, not that his father was very impressed by that. So then his mother got him music lessons on a particular instrument. Can you guess what it was? It was the flute.
The flute. God, that's perfect. That's flute.
The flute.
God, I wouldn't have guessed that in a million years. I was going to say something like a piano.
Not in a million years.
Stradivarius. But it wasn't.
Yeah.
He is the head DJ.
Cello.
He is the head DJ at Mar-a-Lago. You know that.
Yes, he is. And he's got great music taste.
Yes, he does that too. Well, we look forward to the podcast, and thanks for giving us your time, Miranda. We appreciate it, as always. The podcast will be
Thanks
out
so
tomorrow.
much.
It'll be out tomorrow, and we'll get Miranda back on set just as soon as we can.